In this episode, I had the opportunity to talk to Aubrey Terrazas, who is co-founder of Palate Club. And this is a special episode because we're talking more about wine on Crystal Uncorked, which you think we would talk a little bit more about wine, but it's been more business heavy and life topics. So I'm stoked because I know a lot of you listening love wine like I do. That's what brings us together. And Aubrey has a wealth of information. I mean, we barely scratched the surface on what she knows. There's so much to know, which we talk about in this episode, but she shares some really great tips with wine. We talk about the wine that she recommended. It was so nice to have more of a conversation about the wine that we're drinking. And we also talk, the wine industry is very male dominated. So we have a conversation about what that's like for Aubrey getting into it. And she's got some really great advice for women who are looking to get into the industry too. So plus we talk about a wine that she's excited about and has been into, something brand new that I've never heard about. I can't wait to taste it. You can follow Aubrey on Instagram, Palate _club, PALATE _club, palate.com. And stay tuned because I'm going to work with them to do a virtual wine tasting with my Crystal Uncorked community. This is going to be awesome. We've talked about doing this for a while now, and now I've got the company that's going to help me do it. So I'm so excited. I just want to share a little bit more about Aubrey before we dive in. She is an 18-year hospitality professional, Master Sommelier Candidate, and e-commerce entrepreneur who co-founded the digital wine service Palate Club. Beyond leading the international wine buying for the team, Aubrey used her experience of tasting hundreds of wines each year to identify over 200 wine traits, the core data that Palate Club uses to expertly match wines to your taste, which I think is so cool. Aubrey is a wine educator and journalist that champions sustainability and up-and-coming regions for publications such as Somm Journal and Guild Somm. Her ideas and disruption to the classic wine club model positioned her as one of America's top sommeliers and wine entrepreneurs. Aubrey lives between Florida and Lyon, France, where she frequents vineyards and is an avid runner. All right, let's dive into this awesome episode. Hello, I'm Crystal Vilkaitis. I'm a curious, wine-loving entrepreneur who loves to learn and have open and honest conversations. Join me and my amazing guests as we talk about all sorts of relatable business and life stuff. It's my goal that you'll have fun, learn something new, and get inspired. Wine is not required, but is recommended. This is Crystal Uncorked. Aubrey, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to kick things off with what we're drinking, which I asked for your recommendation because you are the pro in this space and we are in different time zones. You're in Portugal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in the south and the Algarve.
Which looks amazing. As I was checking out your Instagram account, like it just looks like you are living an amazing life down there. So this wine, Ramos, which I hope I'm saying correctly, is a red blend. Will you tell everybody about this wine? And is it the same wine that you're drinking now too?
No, it's not. I tried to get something similar, but it can be really hard. They're just different wine markets, and so you never know exactly what you'll find. But yeah, so you have a dry red wine from a port house, which is kind of, it's not a super new trend. I forget exactly what year, but it was, in the last maybe 20, 30 years, they started doing that, if not sooner. So it's Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinto Rojas, I believe. In general, they can use a mix of different red grapes that they use for port. But what's great about it is I really love dry red Portuguese wines from the Douro because they have a lot of fruitiness to them, but they still sort of have that nuanced old world underlying notes. So really great structure, great tannin without being overly tannic or acidic. So it's pretty easy to drink still and very fresh on the nose, but still, dry and complex on the palate.
Love it. I really loved this wine. I will be getting it again.
Great to
I
hear.
was hoping that I would have a glass last night and then have another. I have an interview tonight for Crystal Uncorked. But my boyfriend and I finished the bottle. We were like, this is just so good. It's so good. Now, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking the cheap version of what you have. I would have gotten the same one, but honestly, I'm just on holiday sort of, and so there's not really a good wine shop in the town that I'm staying in right now. So I had to go to a local grocery store, which, I mean, in Europe, you spend €6 on a bottle and it can still be really great. And this one's not bad. But it's another red blend. I almost am embarrassed to show it because yours is way nicer. But I will. So this one is made just for a grocery store called Lidl, which is in Europe. But it's the same thing. It's a Reserva red wine from the Douro. It's dry. It's made with a similar grape profile. Mine has a little bit more Tinta Franca, which is kind of like Cabernet Franc in that it has these floral, spicy notes to it, but still pretty fruity. And mine's just less complex than yours. But
okay. I really love Cab Francs. I am so learning the wine world. I just love wine. I love learning about it. I love tasting. I love learning other people's palates and what they like. Everything wine is just so, I'm very curious by. So I don't know very much yet. I am very infancy in this world, but Cab Franc. So what was the name that is similar to Cab Franc that you just said?
Tinta Franca.
Okay. Awesome. I'm going to have to look for that because that was amazing. As I was drinking this, I was definitely fruity, spice, and I got a little floral on mine too. Would I have gotten a little floral?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Awesome. Love it. Okay. Let's dive in. I want to hear about how you got into the wine industry.
Yeah. So I actually started waiting tables when I was 14. And so even throughout college and everything, I worked in restaurants for a long time because at that point I was able to get pretty nice restaurant jobs. I wasn't just waiting tables at Denny's. I did that when I was 16, for the record. But I was working at Michelin-starred restaurants. And so, of course, you have to know about wine. And the more that I learned about it and the more I started to drink really high quality wine that I had access to at the restaurants, the more curious I got about that world. Just like you, there's so much to learn and it's really exciting. And I also saw, I was a French major because I wanted to go into wine. I switched majors at one point, originally thinking that I wanted to get into winemaking because when you first get into wine, that's the only thing you can think of. But then eventually I worked with a sommelier at a restaurant and I saw him in his bow tie, just going around his little cart, tasting wines all night. And I was like, I want that job. And so I was a somm for many years. After that, I started to take more courses and really focus on that. And also, if you do work at a restaurant as a sommelier, or even as a waiter, actually, I should say, if you work with a somm, you're very advantageous to learn about wine because they kind of take you under the waiters that are interested in wine under their wing and will show you the good wines that they're opening up. And I think my first big wine was Penfolds Lagrange, which is, at the time it was already a $700 bottle on our list.
Wow.
Yeah. And so once you understand what wine can be, then I think that it just really opens your mind so much and gets you really intrigued about learning, how is it that people can work with the environment and the grapes and make something that tastes like this that is so much more nuanced and interesting than whatever I was drinking in college at the time.
Right. Totally. It's fascinating. This world is fascinating. And I looked into some sommelier courses and what that would look like to become. It seems really intense. It's quite a process, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so you can be, it's a profession, first of all. So you can be a som without doing any sort of wine certifications. And many people do just through experience working in restaurants and learning about wine on their own. But if one is to pursue the Court of Master Sommeliers, whether they're going all the way to the Masters or even just to get to the certified level, it is pretty intense because you really need to know all the world of wine. So you need to know, these native Portuguese grapes. You need to know the Memoir yield for random regions in France. You need to know Greece. You need to know Argentina, especially in the U.S. market where we truly work with wines from everywhere.
Right. Right. It's pretty amazing. That's cool. I didn't realize that you don't have to go through such rigorous program, that there's kind of different levels to it, which makes sense. Now tell me about, I'm so interested in Palate Club. I think it's brilliant because it's a way, how I see it, it's just a way to really teach people what they like about wine, what kind of wine that they like, and really match their palate to different kinds of wines. I would love for you to tell my audience about Palate Club and how it was born.
Yeah, so Palate Club was founded by Nicolas Mendihera, and he was a French guy. He grew up, he was an entrepreneur in France. He had a travel company, blah, blah, blah. Not to blah, 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 but, we'll move on. Making a long story short, he moved to the States about 5 years ago and was really frustrated standing in front of these walls that have hundreds of labels. And even though he knew a little bit about wine, it's kind of hard to find wines that you'd like because there's so much out there. And there were at the time some wine delivery services, even companies already that match wines to your taste. But there was still a lot of consumer friction points because, first of all, the companies like wine.com, which are great, I don't mean to knock them, but bigger companies have to buy from bigger wineries. And so you kind of see the same brands over and over and over again. A lot of the wines that you see on wine.com or something would be the same that you might find at the supermarket. And then the companies that matched wines to your taste were actually buying bulk juice and making it a parent company in California, for example. And so it wasn't actually very accurate and it wasn't providing premium wine. And so he wanted to make it easy for people to find wines that match your taste, where you can learn about wine and also have the experience of easily just discovering new bottles from around the world that you already know you're going to like. So I joined pretty much from the beginning. And I'm considered a co-founder. I helped with the wine buying content as well as developing the algorithm by identifying 200 different wine traits that could be found in wine. So we worked with data scientists to develop an algorithm. So when you rate the bottles, it basically feeds into our system, and the more you rate, the more we kind of discover the nuances of your palate. Like Crystal really wants high acid wines. That's important to her, but her fruit profile might vary. So maybe we are always kind of leaning towards higher acid wines, but sometimes black fruit, sometimes it's old world, sometimes it's new world.
That's incredible. So 200 palates, 200 wine tastes, like how that sounds like so much to me, but it also makes sense. I mean, how did that kind of get brought to this world and through Palate Club?
Yeah, well, I'm not a data scientist, but we worked with data scientists in Paris who basically translated something that's really subjective, like wine, by using those traits and putting it into the algorithm. And so every time that we buy a bottle, we rate it as a sommelier. So that way we identify around 30 or 40 traits that are found in the bottle. So that way the customer, like you, can just rate the bottle, and that tells us a lot about your taste just from how much you like it.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I love it. So like for me, I learned this, and I would love to know what your thoughts are, because I've always wondered if it's like legit. But we did a wine tasting in Temecula, and the woman who was pouring said you should always look at the alcohol percentage, because you'll start noticing that you like certain wines at a certain percentage. And so the wine that I liked that day was more of the bold, and it was 14% or higher. So when I'm standing in front of hundreds of bottles, like you talked about, trying to pick something, it's so intimidating. I will often just look for some of the types I know I've liked and then the alcohol percentage. But I've also tried Pinots that are 12 to 13 that I've liked. I tend to be more in that bolder, but what is your take on using that as a system for finding wine you like?
I think that any trick that a new wine lover can use to eliminate choices is helpful. But to your point, I don't think that as a standalone trait is enough information to decide whether you're going to like a bottle or not. And that's why, we use those other traits, because maybe, you do like bolder wines, but maybe that could also be a tannic Pinot Noir, for example.
Right.
So it's not just the alcohol. Maybe it's something else about that bold wine that you like, that besides the alcohol percentage.
Right. Exactly. Okay. That makes sense. It's kind of my first step of qualifying as I'm learning and exploring more. Okay.
Just out of curiosity,
yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what alcohol percentage is the wine that you drank last night?
14. It's
Perfect.
14. Yeah, I know. It's great. And it's funny because on the site that I sent you to take a look, where I knew I had local access to wine, which is Bevmo, like our big liquor store here in California, they say that people that buy this wine also buy Joel Gott, which I don't know if you've tried Joel Gott. It's a California winery here. And I just love Joel Gott for the price point. It's such a great wine. It's such a go-to. And so that was cool to see that they are kind of similar. Would you say that those are similar wines?
I think they definitely have some similarities, and that they both sort of have that fruity profile, a little bit floral, very structured. I think that there's more of those secondary notes in the wine that you're drinking, where it has, some maybe black pepper and some potpourri, some kind of more minerality to it. But I think structurally they're pretty similar.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it was seriously a great pick for me.
Great.
Yeah, I know. So my boyfriend and I, Dustin, we lived in Italy for a month. It was just kind of like this great vacation. And we were there for a friend's birthday that we just turned into a month-long tour around Italy, which was great. And we drank wine every day, of course. And sometimes it would be more than a glass or two. And we were never hungover. And we're like, why is it? So we were talking to one of the winemakers as we were tasting, and she was sharing that she came out to California and did tasting, and she had such a bad hangover from the sulfates that we put in wine. I had no idea about that, which, thinking about it now, it makes sense. But but the thing is I feel like every bottle that I see contains sulfates, unless I'm really looking for that organic wine, and they're kind of hard to find, but I feel like more are coming to the market. I'm hoping so. But I know that you're into the sustainably sourced wine too, and I would love to hear more about that. Does that mean how it's grown, and the ingredients? Is it both of those, as well as, are there things that we should watch out for, like certain ingredients to try to stay away from, so we can have more of a clean wine?
Yeah, well, so there's quite a bit to unpack there. First, the sulfite thing has been very trendy, but honestly, it's a little bit misconstrued, because sulfites are naturally occurring in fermentation. And so, to your point, they're in pretty much every wine. Now, there are some lower quality wines that maybe add a lot of extra sulfites to sort of cover up flaws or bad winemaking, and maybe that kind of give you a headache. But I mean, dried fruit has way more sulfites than the average bottle of wine, and you're not getting hungover or a headache from drinking, your banana chips. So it's
Right.
I think it's a little bit complicated, but I don't think you should specifically avoid sulfites. I do think that not natural wine, I want to be careful with that because that's a whole other world that we can get into. But sustainable wines, I do think, have less hangover, which makes sense. Wine is very difficult for consumers because they don't need to list their process or their ingredients in the same way that other food products do. So if they can use other things in it, and we don't know exactly what their process is. And even something like chemical spraying might affect your headache or hangover in the morning. Sustainable is an umbrella term that basically covers all of the methods of sustainability that a winery could use. So that starts in the vineyard, their choice of not only choosing to use pesticides or not, but also, are they doing regenerative farming that helps the soil to stay alive through monoculture, such as a vineyard? Are they reducing water waste, both in the vineyard and in the winery? Even down to their packaging, because I think very few people know that the biggest carbon footprint from wine actually comes from the bottle itself. It makes up like 50% of the carbon footprint because it's harder to recycle and it's heavier. So it takes more fuel to transport those wines. So there are a lot of different things that could make a winery sustainable. In the United States, we labeled organic. They have to have very, very small amount of sulfites. It's almost impossible to achieve without being no sulfite. So oftentimes you'll see made with organic grapes. And that's also pretty reliable too, because it means that it was grown organically, but maybe it just has sulfites and they just used minimal intervention.
Okay. Fascinating. There really is a lot that goes into it. I mean, this is so silly, but it made me question. I feel like you're seeing more boxed wine, and I feel like boxed wine gets like a bad rap because it used to be just so cheap, right? Mm-hmm. But I have tried some boxed wine that I like, and I feel like that would be more sustainable. What are your thoughts of boxed wine?
Yeah, it's definitely more sustainable, and honestly, for the wineries to be able to make that shift into making more boxed wines and more canned wines, even in Tetra Pak, which is kind of like the milk carton material, we need consumers to trust that the wines can be good. And I really think that's starting to shift as more wineries are kind of championing that and using those packagings. But just keep in mind that it doesn't age as long. For most people, that's fine because most wine gets consumed the night that it's purchased. But a canned wine is really only good for like 6 months. It's something similar for boxed wine. It stays fresh longer in the box once you open it. But in terms of long-term aging, it's only good for, I don't know, a year maximum.
Okay, that's good to know. And I'm glad that you brought up cans too, because I was in Kansas City last week for a show, and I ordered wine, and they bring it up, and it's in a can, and it was my first time having wine in a can, and I was like, all right, let's try this, and it was so great. I do think that there is this consumer education of that you could still have good quality wine. It doesn't always have to be in a glass bottle. So I hope we see more of that too from sustainability perspective, and I think we will. So the wine industry is super male dominated. I did some research before starting this podcast, just knowing I wanted to be in this wine world. And honestly, I don't know exactly what that looks like today. Similar to what you were saying earlier, I kind of was like, I want to make my own wine. I feel like that's kind of where people go next,
Yeah.
And so as I was researching, I just realized there's not a lot of women wine makers, and I just didn't see a lot of women in the industry. So I know that that's something for you. Like, what is that like being a woman in the wine industry?
Yeah. Well, I think that first of all, women tend to take care of each other. And I know many, many women that are in the industry. But just like any male-dominated industry, I think that it can be harder to get the position. It can be harder to get taken seriously, especially in the beginning. And especially when you're young. I was I started somming when I was 24. And so people always thought that I was the hostess when I walked up. It's also an industry where we're drinking alcohol, even for professional circumstances. And so, I think that there's a temptation for men in particular to try and cross those boundaries. So you really have to be very firm with your boundaries and be very clear that you're there for professional reasons. You can, still play, but, not have the temptation to go the easy route. And, I don't know, maybe this is something we can cut out, but I'll leave that up to you. I think that sometimes women feel pressured to put themselves in a dangerous situation because they think it will advance their career. And maybe it does in the short term, but I don't think that that's doing women any favors either. It can only get you so far as well. I think you kind of get pigeonholed. And so it's harder for us because we have to really make those choices, and we have to be a little bit stronger, and we have to be twice as good as men as well, because, people will immediately want to discredit us or think that we're stupid, or think we don't know. And I mean, it has been frustrating in the past when I see male colleagues who get promotions faster, or even at tableside when I was a sommelier, and a waiter who knew nothing about wine but had a French accent was able to, convince tables that they know something, whereas I had to really, show my knowledge from the beginning to get that trust.
Wow. So what kind of advice would you have for women who are just starting to get into this industry or are in it, but struggling a little bit with the gender bias?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that it's important to know what your goals are and what your voice is from the beginning, especially in the world of influencers. I think that it is very tempting to sexualize yourself, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that if that's your voice and if that's who you are. But there's that temptation because we have these vanity metrics where you get a lot of likes if you have a nice bottle and a butt shot. But if your goal is to be taken seriously, then unfortunately you do kind of have to set those boundaries. You can still be sexy, you can still be confident. But maybe that's channeling Beyonce instead of Kim Kardashian, if that makes any sense. Making sure that you still hold your power and you show that you're knowledgeable, and you can be, beautiful, and you can be a woman and still feel feminine while also, being a powerhouse and really knowing your stuff.
Right. Great tips. It makes me think, I feel like I'm in the social media industry as well with my company. And I know people can get very caught up in, like you were saying, the vanity metrics and kind of lose yourself. And I recently did an episode about, like, for me, I'm just a naturally competitive person, which can be good, but it can also be challenging. And I will look to see what other people are doing and feel like, oh, I'm not as far along as them. And you start measuring. And I realize, like, I really got to stop doing this and just really focus on me and try to compete against myself, right? And not other people. And I think there's an element of that too, like you said, of really, what are your goals? What is your voice? And then it's kind of like, stay in your lane, right? Just really focus on that. Don't compete. Don't care about all those metrics. And I really do believe that if you can stay true to you, that's what people love, right? And it takes that patience, but it can really then get you where you want to go in a way you want to get there.
Yeah, I think that's good advice in general, for women pursuing a career, is to stay authentic, because it can be, you have a lot of pressure from so many different areas, but if you keep your goals in mind, and if you just remember who you are as a person, then I think that authenticity really shines through in what you're trying to do, and people respect that.
Yeah, I agree. Now, okay, so speaking of social media, because I often will ask my guests their favorite social media platforms. So first of all, I'd love to know that. Which one do you spend most of your time on?
Ooh, so it's traditionally been Instagram, but honestly, I feel I've been kind of pulling away from that for the past year. And maybe it's in part because of the vanity metrics. Like, I think maybe I moved to France 2 years ago, and I definitely noticed that my engagement started to drop a lot. And I think there's, something in the algorithm that doesn't show as much to your base that you had before. And also because I am really interested in sharing ideas about sustainability, about impact, about diversity in the wine industry. And it's not a great platform for that, really. Or it can be, but, it's more challenging. So I've been actually very active on LinkedIn lately. And even Twitter more often. But yeah, I think that Instagram has been my baseline for a long time, but we'll see how it goes in a year.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and with the move too, I mean, I feel like that algorithm is always changing. So there is an element of that. It is a very specific type of content that works really well on Instagram. So I think if you're trying to have more of those other business type conversations that are more meaningful to you too, I love that you're on LinkedIn. I feel like LinkedIn is just such a powerhouse social site right now, especially from a B2B, and you're getting great organic reach, which is hard to get in other platforms. So that's great. Now, from a marketing perspective of marketing Palate Club, what has been something that's worked really well for you guys there? Is it social media, or has it been something else that's worked well?
Well, we are pretty active on social media. I think it's important for any business to have a social media presence. Even if you don't see the direct conversions, that's still the first place that people look at to get a sense of your brand and to join the community. Right. But I think in terms of actual acquisition, events are actually really good for us, which makes sense from a wine perspective because it's something you kind of have to try before you buy, or have some sort of trust factor in a way that isn't there for like fashion or music, where you can kind of see or hear the product and then you buy. And so we were doing quite a bit before COVID, and now we're starting an ambassador program where we work with people that, want to host a digital tasting or even a live tasting with their followers or even with their friends, and they get commission on the sales, which I think it's a really fun experience with a blind tasting. It's a great reason to get people together. And once people try it and see their profile, they really love it.
I want to do that. That sounds awesome. Actually,
yeah.
I talk about doing a tasting. Yeah, I talk about doing a tasting with my audience, and so many people have been like, I would love to do it. Let's do it. So I will reach out and set that up with you guys. That would be so cool.
We'd love that.
Yeah, I feel like events, especially so with COVID, thankfully we can do all these virtual events and more people are connecting that way. So you can still see friends and family and do these tastings. I think that's such a lovely way to connect people online. So did you have an impact from COVID? Because some businesses really felt it, some didn't, and some it actually really worked out for them. It grew their business. What kind of impact did you guys have?
Yeah, well, I think for many established e-commerce businesses, it helped to grow their company. But we're still very much in early startup phase. And so for us, I wouldn't say that it really went too far in either direction. But we didn't see that push that maybe, wine.com grew 300%. Same thing with Vivino. But those companies have already been very established and kind of more household names as it is. But it did give us some time to really focus on the product and our acquisition channels. And so I think that we've made huge improvements. We're about ready to launch a new version of the app that we're really excited about. We added new features. So in addition to your profile, we actually identified 14 if you include rosé, 14 different wine clusters, where basically we said, these are the major styles of wine in the world, not just red Bordeaux or Burgundy, but actually this is like what that profile looks like. And we gave them fun names like, for example, the Boss, if you like Bordeaux, or or that's the Baron, but the Boss is more Napa style. But I think that's a really fun thing to share with your friends, and to kind of, especially when you're first getting the profile, you see, your tannin acid, maybe you don't know what all that means, but you can say like, okay, cool. Like I'm the Baron. I love Bordeaux style wines.
I love that. Like self-identifying with your wine taste. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to check that out. I love that so much. So it sounds like you guys were very productive during that time. And as a startup too, you're probably just continuously working on new features and figuring out what the audience needs. And I kind of love the startup period of a business. I think it's so exciting trying, just to build it. And I just love what you guys are doing. I think it's so smart. And I can't wait to be more involved and have more people check it out who I know and do this tasting. I want to know before we wrap up here, is there a wine that you are just like, you're loving right now, or it's surprising you, or it's something that you didn't like before, but you're really into, like any kind of thing a trend right now that you're loving?
That's a great question. Well, I've obviously been drinking a lot of Portuguese wines this summer because I've been in Portugal for 2 months. And I normally live in France. So in Europe, you kind of find the local wines more or less. Specifically, we spent a month in Madeira. Have you had Madeira wines before?
No.
Okay, so it is a fortified wine, which I think that a lot of people are turned off by sweet wines. But I think that there's still a place, and a lot of Madeira has a bigger range of sweetness as well. For me, port can be very kind of heavy and cloying, whereas Madeira does have a drier style where it's really maybe more off dry, and it works really well for pairings, for aperitif, and it does range into sweet, which is great with a cigar or chocolate. And so I think that there's a lot of quality. It has such an interesting story to it too, and there's actually a huge relationship with American history because of the colony. Madeira was passed through Great Britain and then came to America, and the Declaration of Independence was actually signed with a glass of Madeira.
Oh my gosh, how cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, totally checking out Madeira. Madeira. I am checking out Madeira. I really actually like port. I prefer port than like any kind of sweet. I'm not a big dessert person, but you're right. Sometimes it can be like almost syrupy, and I would love to, find something new. So awesome suggestion. Of course, I feel like you probably have a million amazing suggestions. I got a sampling of that with Ramos. Anything you want to leave my audience with, Aubrey, before we wrap up here?
If anyone is interested, and we talked a lot about pursuing a career in wine, and it is such a fun industry, and I also just want to say, learn to love learning, because it's endless, the things that you can know about wine. And it's very important to be humble, because you'll always be surprised with what you can learn.
That is such excellent advice. I feel like I'm a life learner, and I often say I love learning, and that this industry is deep with education. Like, I feel like it's endless. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us today. This was so educational, and we want people to check you out. It's on Instagram. It's palate_club, which we will link to all of this. Palateclub.com, Aubrey.
Yeah, it's PALATE club. Sometimes people want to spell it like a wine or like a color palette instead of like a mouth palette. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Aubrey Terrazas. You can find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody, go check out some of the wines that Aubrey recommended. We'll link to them. This was so great. Great meeting you, Aubrey. And cheers with my empty bottle of wine. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. All right, everybody. I'll see you on the next CU. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening. Are you on Instagram? I'd love to see pictures of you listening to the show, a screenshot of your favorite episode, and or your favorite wines. Share them with me. Just follow and tag @Crystal Uncorked. I can't wait to see you there. All right, I'll see you on the next See You.